Okay, well, welcome everyone to our third installment of our Great Spiritual Traditions of the Western Church Lenten Spirituality series. Very happy to have you all joining with us remotely tonight. And I'm very happy to introduce our speaker, Father Emanuel, or he goes by Father Manny Vasconcelos. Some of you heard this Sunday, if you were at one of my masses when I was talking about this presentation. I go back with Father Manny when I was in my first assignment as a priest at Providence College in the chaplain's office. He was a student there, one of our great leaders in our campus ministry program, super involved in basically everything. And I had the joy of working with him and talking with him a bit as he was doing some of his vocation discernment. Of course, I was hoping he'd go the way of the white habit, but Lord had other plans for him. So Father Manny was ordained in June of 2018. And since his ordination, he's been serving at St. Anne's Catholic Church in Columbus, Georgia. So without further ado, I hand it over to you, Father Manny. Take it away and tell us everything we need to know about Franciscan spirituality and all things Franciscan.
Oh boy. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And good evening to everyone. I know I can't really see you all, but I know that you're here. So it's good to see the presence of everyone for this evening. And I think it's great that you're committing to this as a parish to learn about the different traditions, that you've already heard about Benedictine and Carmelite spirituality. You'll be hearing about other traditions in the church. And it's a great treasure. It's one of those things that the church has so much variety within it, and it's such a beautiful testament to the work of the Spirit. So what I want to do is give kind of a brief overview of Franciscan life. I titled it, It's Complicated, because like with any family history, there's a lot going on. One of the jokes that I always hear is that, even God doesn't know how many branches of, Franciscans there are. There's so many of them. But I think it's important for us to look at it as there's a history, there's a tradition, to understand where this all kind of comes from and to see how it's lived out now. And so what I'll do is I'll share my screen here with a slideshow. Oh, I disabled screen sharing. Oh no, can you do that again, Father John Paul? I don't know if it's possible. I gotta share my slideshow with photos. Perfect. I'm the co-host now. Okay, so I will share with you what I have here. Okay, so here we go. So it's complicated. This is actually a picture from the upper Basilica of St. Francis in Assisi. So if any of you have been on a pilgrimage to Italy, to Rome, hopefully you were able to stop by Assisi. It's a beautiful area. And I was able to go in 2016 as a friar. I actually went for the first time through Providence College. I remember the liturgical choir that I was with had a pilgrimage to Italy, and Assisi was one of the stops. So I went there before I was even considering being a Franciscan back in 2003, I think it was. And so yeah, now this last time that I went there was in preparation for my solemn vows. And it's just a wonderful testament to the life of St. Francis. The frescoes on the walls there in the upper church are beautiful, and just kind of tell the story of St. Francis. All right, so let's go through here. At the death of St. Francis, is there someone speaking or talking? Let's see here. Oh, okay. All right. So when Francis died, or before his death, what's written in the Legend of Francis by Saint Bonaventure, who wrote it in the 1260s, he said that Francis said to his brothers, "I have done what is mine. May Christ teach you yours." And it's beautiful words. It's a reminder that Francis, he had kind of an intuition. It wasn't that he wanted to start an institution. He really just, he wanted to follow the gospel. And others started to follow along with him. And so it became a community. And he knew that he had to let go of what was becoming of it, even in his last, moments of life in 1226. So I think the call that Francis gives to his brothers is that, may Christ teach you how to continue living the gospel. And so that's why these words really echo even now to our friars. This here is kind of the beginning of the rule of St. Francis, where he talks about the evangelical counsel, so how to live the gospel. He says, the rule and life of the lesser brothers, that was what we were known as. We weren't known as Franciscans by St. Francis. It came later. So he called us lesser brothers. That's why you see the OFM at the end of our names. It's the Order of Friars Minor, the lesser brothers. So the rule in life of the lesser brothers is this: to observe the holy gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ by living in obedience without anything of one's own and in chastity. And so we see there the three, got it, okay, good. Yeah, you're a co-host, so you can do that. I'll keep presenting. So there we see the three vows, or the three parts of the vow that a Franciscan makes. You often see in a Franciscan the knots, the three knots on their rope, the cord. And what that signifies are those three parts: obedience, without anything of one's own, and in chastity. You often hear without anything of one's own as poverty, but it's also important to see the understanding in Francis's writings is when he wrote in Latin, he wrote sine proprio. So sine proprio is basically that: without anything of one's own, nothing that I can claim as mine, that it is belongs to the community and for the use of ministry in the church. So that's the evangelical counsels that really Francis took on, just as Dominic was really contemporary of Francis. So this was something that was a desire of the renewal within the church, was this desire to live the gospel in a way that really drew attention to those who were challenging it. So when we look at the rule of 1223, this is the official rule. There was a rule that was written before in 1221. There was a spoken acceptance of the rule back in 1209. But us conventual friars, we like to look at the seal of approval from the Pope. So this is called the Regula Bullata. So it's got the bull, the papal bull on it. So in 1223, that was known as the official rule of St. Francis, and it's followed by all the friars in the first order. It's a short rule, it's only 12 chapters, but it's something that covers different aspects of the friars' lives in that time, and obviously expanded on through the various constitutions of the different branches, which we'll talk about. So on November 29, 1223, we have the approval from Pope Honorius III to live out this life of St. Francis. And so the one branch of the friars, the OFMs, like to speak more about the oral approval by Pope Innocent III in 1209. Conventuals, we like to talk about November 29. And November 29 is actually, for the conventual Franciscans, the feast of all Franciscan saints. So we remember all those who lived the rule of St. Francis in their time that were made saints in the church. So that's where we begin, really, the officialness of the Franciscan family. So the friars were known in groups as the friars of the community. They weren't called Franciscans right away. I think it came later on. more often than not, they were known as such because of their common life. They lived together, they prayed together, ate together, they did things together. And so they were seen as, oh, these are the brothers, the friars of the community. Now, one of the things that happened in the first, like I want to say in the first centuries of the Franciscans, was there was natural movements of friars in various parts. They went to all parts of the world, really, to spread the gospel, to serve the needs of the poor, and to be present wherever. Now, they went into cities, they went into hermitages, they went to large metropolitan areas. They were invited to teach, especially Saint Anthony of Padua, who is kind of like, to me, he's the saint that I was drawn to first. I appreciated St. Anthony's Portuguese heritage, his call within a call because he was an Augustinian friar and then felt called to join the Franciscans. So St. Anthony was very capable of teaching the friars, and that was what St. Francis even asked him to do. Kind of called St. Anthony his own bishop in some sense, even though he wasn't a bishop, but he kind of called him that because of his ability to teach theology to the friars. So, anyways, we were known to go to the schools, in Padua, in Oxford, Paris, Cologne. There were large centers of study, just as the Dominicans were also doing, being present in the cities to minister in the heart of them. And so we find friars there. They start building these large houses, get places to gather in the cities. But also at the same time, there were those who wanted to embrace the simpler style of living, an austere way of living that Francis certainly showed in his lifetime. And so they went off to remote hermitages. They wanted to go into the countryside. They had smaller living conditions. And so they wanted to live simply. So we had kind of that dynamic from the get-go, that there were friars doing ministry in the church in the cities, ministry for the church in the countryside. So that word conventual that describes my branch of the Franciscans, that's from that Latin word convenire, that word meaning to come together. So we were known as the friars that lived in convents. In Europe, they're often called convents. In the United States, convent usually denotes a group of sisters. So in the States, we tend to call our houses friaries. And I think even most English-speaking countries speak of friaries. But when you see sometimes the signs in front of different places, like this, the picture behind this slide is a picture of the Basilica of St. Francis. There's a friary attached to that, and it's known as the Sacro Convento, the Holy Friary, where we're closest to the tomb of Francis. So the conventos in Europe were very much where we lived in the larger houses in the cities. Okay. Here's another picture, so you can kind of see that's the church there. Obviously, that's the upper basilica. There's three levels really. There's the upper basilica, the lower basilica, and then the lower chapel where there is the tomb of St. Francis that people can visit. And then all along here, this is part of the friary, the Sacro Convento. So it was built soon after Francis's death in 1226. Like they were planning on this. I think I forget if he was in San Rufino before. I can't remember. I know he died at the Porciuncula. So if you've been to Assisi, you know that there's a basilica down the hill of Assisi where there's a church within a church. That's the Porciuncula. The little church inside there is the original, and they built a giant church around it. But anyways, they desired to build this in honor of St. Francis. So it was in process, obviously, until 1253 was when it was completed. But our friars have been there from the get-go, our conventual friars. You often see them dressed in black. In Europe, there's more. It's more common to see our conventual branch in black. We also wear gray. So we kind of have both. We don't have like one swatch that we all wear. So you see black or gray and different shades, like some lighter grays, some darker. Here is Padua. So this is, if you've ever been to the shrine, well, the Basilica of St. Anthony, you'll see here that it's a large building. His tomb is in this corner over here. And then you can see all the courtyards. Some are open to the public, and then there's others that are reserved for the friars who live there and minister there. It's a big operation there. They have a printing press there. They have lots of opportunities for people to go to confession in various languages. And so it's really a hub for devotion to St. Anthony. And so that was built soon after. Well, actually, I think it was already in existence. I think it was known as the Basilica of St. Mary. And then they brought St. Anthony into the church to be placed there for private prayer and devotions. So there we see another presence of our conventual friars in Padua. And in Padua, they don't even say his name. They just say Il Santo. They just say the saint, right? Okay, let's go to the saint's, tomb. Which is ironic because I think just a few blocks away, because I visited Padua, a few blocks away, there's a basilica where there's the tomb of St. Luke. I'm like, well, he's a saint. He's a bigger saint in some sense than Anthony, but Anthony is the boy. He is the one. He is the one from Padua that they take great pride in. So there we have it. That's Il Santo. Okay, so I was saying earlier how there is this natural separation of friars working in cities and in hermitages. And in 1517, there was a papal bull by Pope Leo X called Ite Vos, okay? You too go into my vineyard, okay? And it began that distinction of two groups of Franciscans. So this is where there was the observants and the conventuals. So as I said, the conventuals were the ones that ministered in the cities. The observants were the ones that tended to serve in the countryside and in simpler settings. Okay, they didn't want to live in these giant houses. Like they would do the same work probably of serving the needs of the church, but they didn't want the large houses. They would kind of look at our giant places and say, that's not poverty. That's not what we're called to. And Francis wouldn't approve. So there was a little tension among the brothers for sure. And I know, actually, I remember, and Father John Paul can correct me or clarify, I do remember learning that those terms, observance and conventuals, were also used in other traditions. So the Dominicans, I believe, had observance and conventuals, and then there was a movement towards unity around the same time. So like in 1517, there wasn't a separation of the Dominicans, rather coming together, and they stayed together. So I was like, oh, look at that, just leave it to the friars. There's always this story of, if you don't like it, just separate and do other things. And we'll see that in the future slides too, because there is a third group coming. So yeah, we can see here, this is kind of a, it's a little involved chart. You see the Friars Minor, 1209, Brethren of the Community. There's always different interpretations. Like this one, I forget where I found this one, but I kind of liked how it shows certain groups that came at different times. These were, reform groups from within. They probably had a certain style, a certain way of revisiting the origins of the rule and wanting to live that out. So you see the different breakups, okay? Here's the 1517 split, right? Observance conventuals. And then we're going to learn about the Capuchins in a moment. But here there's a lot of the breakups that took place tended to happen because of the understanding of sine proprio, like that understanding of poverty. For the conventuals, it wasn't as much of a hotly debated issue. We didn't, like, we understood it as, without anything of one's own. And so we didn't really have a need to show that we were more poor than someone else. But there was kind of that tendency in some groups, like they wanted to have less fabric on their habits, so shorter habits, and They wanted to really show that they embraced poverty. And for certain groups, I feel like that's good. Is if it's going to help them to grow in holiness and bring them to God, great. But most of the groups that are now in existence, they realize that we can understand this in a proper sense and still do good ministry. If we embraced poverty, then I wouldn't be having this session with you right now because I wouldn't have a computer. If we embraced poverty to that extent, then I'd have difficulty doing a sick call because I'd have to rely on someone else to pick me up and drop me off. So there's certain things that when we think through them, we understand the need for certain things, but it's the attitude with which we approach them. So sine proprio is there in my mind and in my heart with whatever I use and whatever I have, that it in essence belongs to the community, and it should be for my use to help me in my ministry. So in 1528, there was the Capuchin reform. Pope Clement VII gave a group of the observants the bull called Religionis Zelus, and it gave them a stricter observance of the Franciscan rule. So these were from the observant group that felt a call to a more zealous, austere way of living. So their way of living is distinct in that they tend to wear long beards. They have the habit that has the pointed capuche, hence the name Capuchin. They have a long hood, goes down to the waist. And so these were reform groups that wanted to try to live this more austere way of living. Obviously, they needed to be under a general, someone to kind of oversee them. And they couldn't do it within the observance because they were breaking from them. And they weren't going to allow it. So they came under the wing of the conventuals. They were under our obedience. They lived their way with the Pope's approval, obviously, until 1619. And then they had their own minister general. So each of the branches now, the observance, the conventuals, and the Capuchins, each have their own successor of St. Francis. So it gets really complicated when you look at, okay, when did this one come in and how many are there? So this is where it starts to get a little more complicated, but it's pretty much now those three groups. Since 1897, we have had three branches in the First Order. Pope Leo XIII declared it. So at that point, there were these different breakoff groups within the observance. At that time, I don't know if they even use that term anymore, but they broke off. They had the Zuccolanti, the Reformati. They had all these different groups. And so Pope Leo said to them, you're all going to be one. And so that's why they became known as the OFMs of the Leonine Union. But then the conventuals and the Capuchins retained their names. Okay. So that was what happened in 1897. So it's very recent in church understanding. That's pretty recent. But that was where we understood the three branches of the First Order of Franciscans. So when we speak about these different groups, we say that they are branches of the First Order. Okay? They're all brothers. We'll talk more about the other different Franciscans you might know in a moment. But those three are the ones to definitely look at. So conventuals, we tend to wear gray and black. The Capuchins wear a brown habit with that long hood. And then the OFMs wear a brown habit as well. Their hood looks a little different from ours. It kind of curves. I think I have some pictures coming up so you can see that. Yeah, so here's our conventual habit in the black and the gray. I know these guys. This is my minister provincial at the moment, Father James McCurry. You probably met him. Maybe he's come around. I don't know. He gets around. He's all over the place. So that's the gray habit with the long capuche. Here's the Capuchins that wear the brown. I don't have them turned around, but you can kind of see that their hood goes a little long ways back. And then here's the OFM. So this is what their habits look like You might see them in different places. I know one of their bigger ministries up north, I would say, is in New York City. They have the St. Francis Church on, oh gosh, is it 31st Street? I forget now, but they do serve right there in the city as well. So it's kind of ironic. I've said this kind of as a joke sometimes, like, well, now we all serve in cities, so the distinctions really, I don't know if it really makes a difference right now. I think we're embracing the traditions of our branches, which is good. But it's also important for us to look at why we separated, and why we still need to be separate. So those are all things for hopefully a future, movement of the Spirit. So just like the Dominicans, there are three orders. We have the first order that I've spoken about so far, and then we've got the second order, which is the Poor Clares. So these are cloistered sisters. And I remember learning that the sisters, the second order Dominican sisters, were really the heart of the Dominicans, that they started it up and brought it to prayer, and really helped the Dominican order to stay rooted in prayer. And our Poor Clares are like that as well. Saint Clare was a contemporary of Saint Francis as well. If you've seen maybe some movies, there's different depictions of their relationship, but she was someone who felt a desire to be a friar. She really felt that call. Obviously, she couldn't live with the friars. And so this community of Poor Clares became kind of their established way of living, which was different from the Benedictine cloistered nuns. So Clare wanted a different way of living. And so she was able to have a rule for her way of life among the Clares. So that's something that she was able to see in her time. There's different reform groups that exist. I've heard of the Colatines and the Urbanites. Ultimately, the Poor Clares tend to live cloistered. They stay within one location, and their ministry is one of prayer. So they are kind of the motor for a lot of our friars. We go and visit them when we can. I haven't been up to a group. Obviously, I think I have a picture here of a group of Poor Clares. Yes, there's some Poor Clares in Chesterfield, New Jersey. And they're wonderful. I visited a few times when I was in formation, like in my first years of formation. I haven't been back yet to celebrate Mass with them. And obviously with COVID, it's been kind of hard to maintain that kind of presence. But I know our friars do try to stay in touch with them, and the ones that live in and minister in New Jersey go and visit them. They're not connected with us in any way, because I think they were connected to a group of OFMs. But for friars and sisters, we get along pretty well anyway. So we try to stay in touch with each other when we can. Here's some Poor Clares in Dublin, Ireland. So the habit looks a little different, but they all follow the rule of St. Clare. They have a cloistered way of living. They're very happy. Okay, and then now the third order. This is where it's like, here comes everybody. So we've got the TORs, which you've probably heard of if you've been to or heard about the Franciscan University of Steubenville, Ohio. It's staffed by Franciscans of the Third Order Regular, the TORs, and they wear a black habit. So it kind of looks like ours. If you go to Europe, you might see a TOR, you might see a conventual, you don't know. But there you have it. There's the Third Order Regular. It's another community that was started, and they follow that rule. So they don't follow the rule of St. Francis for the First Order. There's a rule that Francis himself wrote for the Third Order, as a way of saying, for those who wish to adopt this life. I had a link here, but I think it's just for the sake of time, I won't click on it. But there literally are hundreds of Third Order religious groups of sisters. We have sisters everywhere that serve in hospitals and in schools, in homeless shelters. They serve the needs of their communities. So there's lots of them. And I have a couple of pictures of some that I know. And then also the third order Franciscans as diocesan priests. We have some secular priests, priests that serve in a diocese that want to adopt the Franciscan way of life. I'm sure that's similar with the lay Dominicans in some sense. There might be some priests, diocesan priests, that embrace the spirituality of Saint Dominic. And so same with our third order priests, that sometimes there are those that become a secular Franciscan as a priest. So they don't live as a friar per se, but they embrace the lifestyle. And then the OFS is the secular Franciscans. So those are lay men and women who are living the third order rule. So here are the TORs. So their habit is very similar to the conventuals. One distinction would be that the conventuals have the freedom to use the Franciscan crown, which is the rosary that you see the Dominicans have also on the left side of their belt. So we have that option in the first order. The third order doesn't usually have that available to them. So I think some guys sometimes try and put on a rosary or something, but it's not something that's actually traditional in their community. But these are some of the guys that I remember having classes with at Catholic University. Here we have a group of sisters from Mishawaka, Indiana. When I was a novice, we had our novitiate in Mishawaka. I remember I was like, where is that? I had to look it up. It's not far from South Bend, like the Notre Dame area. And there's a beautiful community of sisters that was up the hill from where our novitiate house was at that time. And we would visit them pretty often for fellowship, and we would get to know the older sisters. I remember once a week we would spend time with the sisters in the infirmary. So they're known as the Sisters of St. Francis of Perpetual Adoration. And they tend to serve in schools and hospitals. Their communities always put emphasis on perpetual adoration. And so they have that in their mother house. There's always a sister praying before the Lord in the Eucharist. And they're a lovely community. I've stayed in touch with a number of the sisters there, even as I minister here in Columbus. And then here we have a group of secular Franciscans I think this was in Indiana somewhere. They have gatherings. They obviously try to come together regularly to embrace aspects of Franciscan spirituality. There's usually a friar or two that help with kind of being a spiritual guide, as you would imagine with secular, the lay Dominicans, just to kind of have that connection with the community. So there we have some seculars. One of the things that happens in the southern hemisphere is that a lot of the Franciscan communities in Latin America and Brazil, they have what's known as Jufra, so Franciscan youth, okay? And these are groups of young people who want to embrace the secular Franciscan way of life. So it's not just seeing if they want to become friars or poor clares or sisters, but to kind of embrace the spirituality of Saint Francis as a youth and in the future as they continue on in their lives. I actually know this guy over here in the center. I met him when I visited Brazil back in 2013. And they're a wonderful, there's energy, and they're excited, they're so excited about Saint Francis and what he has to offer the world. And so they do a good job of bringing that out in their different ministries that they do as a community. So some of the elements of Franciscan life, I mean, it's hard to kind of narrow it down, but I think these certainly are things that were near and dear to Saint Francis. He wanted to embrace the Incarnation. That's why we see the first Christmas creche, right, was Saint Francis's recreation of the moment when our Lord was born. So we see in him a love of seeing the humility of God to enter our world as a baby. We also see that love of the passion. Francis would speak often about adoring our Lord and remembering the suffering he endured. The practice of the Stations of the Cross was something that started in the Holy Land, obviously, and our Franciscan friars were staffed there a lot of times. They were placed in the different ministries, the different holy sites. And so I think the practice of recalling the steps of our Lord was something that the Franciscans continued on in their ministry. The Eucharist, I think that's the heart of, I would hope, any tradition. Certainly, Francis had a love for the friars to pray before the Lord and see him present in the Eucharist, to honor priests who bring our Lord to them in the Eucharist. Francis had a love of Scripture, certainly listened to the Word of God, but also used it as his kind of GPS to help him guide him where he was to go. Literally, quite literally at first, because I think that was where he started understanding the take nothing with you. You know, there were certain elements of Scripture that he heard and felt the call to live that out. And then the Franciscan devotion to Mary is something that is very alive and well. When we talk about Franciscans and their prayers to Mary, there's prayers that Francis himself composed. When we look at the understanding of the Immaculate Conception, you know, that was one thing that was hotly debated in the time of, John Duns Scotus, right? And the Dominicans. Like there were certain moments where understanding Mary, it was still something that needed to be fleshed out and understood through the passage of time. And so the champion of the Immaculate Conception, the way we understand Mary as conceived without sin, that was something that came from Blessed John Duns Scotus, who spoke of that. So yeah, so those are elements that you would see in a Franciscan spirituality for sure. For friars, I'd say that there were three main things that we focus our attention on as we continue to move into the future. Fraternity, minority, conversion. That those are things that we embrace and need to look at how we're living them out in the world. So how am I present to my brothers? How can we focus our energies on building community, like the fraternity, and then let ministry flow out of that? And then that minority, obviously, the order of friars minor, as I say there, to seek the lower place, to be a lesser brother. How is that expressed now in 2021? So those are things that we do speak of in our community, especially, but I think it's present in all of the Franciscan groups. Conversion, that's something that Francis obviously embraced in his lifetime and wants us to embrace. That symbol of the Tau cross. So you've probably seen a cross that's like a big T. That was something that expressed Francis's desire for conversion, to be conformed to the cross of Christ and to be marked with the seal of the Tau. Those are all things that Francis really started up, and it became something of a reminder to future followers of St. Francis to live a life that's always looking to convert, to turn back to the Lord. And then here, this is an older photo, but we have the ministers general of the OFMs. I think he still is the head for the OFMs. His name is Father Michael Perry. I forget the names of some of these others. So this was, I forget what year this was taken. This is the head of the TOR, the Third Order Regular Friars, right? There's Pope Francis, obviously. This was our Minister General for the Conventuals. His name is Marco Tasca. So he's there in the conventual black. And then Father Mauro, I believe was his name. He was, I don't know if he still is, but he was the Minister General of the Capuchins. So all four, the three branches of the First Order and then the Third Order Regular, they all met with Pope Francis. And I believe there was discussion, at least to start looking at how can we envision these different groups of friars to come together. It's a headache to think of logistically. It's a headache even just to unite provinces. Um, Different regions have different practices and different histories, and so even within our different communities, it can be a headache. So it's just that beginning process of how can we discern this? How can we live in such a way to show the unity of the Franciscans versus the distinctions? So who knows what the future has in store? I'm hopeful. I think there is potential that we could see that in maybe in my lifetime, who knows? But I do see the interaction happening between the different groups constantly. Like I know friars in all of the different branches. And so it's good that we at least get to know each other, minister with each other, because those are ways in which we can move towards unity. All right, so that's all I've got for the slideshow. I know we still have time for questions or comments. So feel free to ask. I may have an answer, I may not, because I don't have all of the research in front of me, but I'm willing to answer whatever questions you might have.
Okay, thank you so much, Father Manny, for that presentation and the slideshow as well.
Yes,
And hold on a second, let me get my own video back on here if we can
very
work
good.
that. So as we have in the past couple of weeks, if you're on your computer, if you could type your questions in the chat box, that way I can kind of look at them and I'll bounce them to you, Father Manny. That way we don't have, 40 people all turning on their microphones and shouting out questions all at once.
I
So
see one here about, yeah, St. Francis and the Wolf, right? The Wolf of Gubbio, right? Um,
what to tell us that? What is that?
Yeah, so there is a story that he tamed a wolf. You know that the story goes. I don't know. Like again, it's hard to kind of see where there's an actual like this actually happened, or if this is a way to tell something about Saint Francis. But the story goes that there was a wolf in Gubbio that was bothering the people, and they were afraid of the wolf, and they couldn't approach the wolf. And so Francis was willing to approach the wolf. He went up to it, and so he was able to tame the wolf in that sense by his willingness to approach. And so it's a story that shows he was unafraid of those threats in some sense, and taught the people to see in a different way. Yeah, so the Wolf of Gubbio, you can look it up. I'm sure there's stories written out about it, but yeah, I'm not sure exactly how literal we can take it, but it's a beautiful way to see how Francis certainly was willing to dialogue and enter with people that maybe would have put boundaries or whatever in the way.
Okay. There's a question here, other than associated with the pandemic, so we'll set that aside. What are your top 3 challenges and top 3 blessings? So I guess you can answer on behalf of your conventual province or
Yeah.
at whatever scale you want, but basically the challenges to you and the blessings that you
Mhm.
experienced as a Franciscan conventual friar.
Yeah, yeah. That's really good. That's a good one. I would say probably one of the bigger challenges is coming together. Like that, I mean, we come together as our own community. We have a group of 6 friars that live together here in Columbus. So we get together, obviously, but we haven't gotten together with other friars as regularly as we used to. We used to have regional days. We used to have, just a celebration. Go together and celebrate St. Francis Day, and so there's different things that um, prevent us from doing what we normally did. So that would be like the biggest of the challenges. One of the bigger opportunities, though, I would say, I've thought a lot about how this feels at times like novitiate. Like it feels for me like I'm reliving that separation from things and having to reimagine how to do things, or entering into a deeper spirit of prayer in the midst of all of this. So it's been for me an opportunity to kind of sort through stuff. It's been a chance to kind of reimagine some things. And so I think that wouldn't have happened had this not taken place. So that's been kind of an opportunity to look at life in a new sense, and ministry as well.
Okay. Um, Maybe without going into too much detail, but someone asked about the main obstacles maybe to blocking that unity. I presume he means the unity of the various four big groups of friars.
Right, right. I would imagine a lot of it is the traditions that we hold on to. And that's going to be a thing of letting go. It's like that sine propria that I talked about. Like, we can't claim anything as ours. And so letting go of some of those things will take time. It may happen sooner rather than later, depending on the situation of the different communities. They might need to let go of a ministry because they don't have enough friars serving there. So those are all things that, I think that how to envision embracing all these different traditions and letting them honor them, but still coming together. Like, I think that's going to be a challenge, because I think we want to do that. We don't want to just say, okay, nix everyone, here's the swatch, you all put it on and that's it. That's not going to happen with us. That can't happen. That's just not how we are. So it's figuring out how we're going to do it, and I think that's going to take a lot of time. Yeah.
Okay.
But we have had gatherings. Like, I know that the friars in Italy have done a lot of these different sessions where they've gathered together to discuss, to have these moments where they talk about different aspects of how we can come together.
Okay. Two super maybe quick factual questions that won't take long to answer. One was St. Francis a deacon? And then the other one, someone observing that around here, at least all the conventuals that she had met have all been Polish. Is there some particular reason for that?
Okay, yeah. So Francis, it's said in the liturgy of the hours that Francis was a deacon, right? We celebrate the feast of Francis on October 4, and it says that he was a deacon of the church. It's understood that he was. There's art that depicts him as such, and I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. Like, he was someone who was devoted to the Eucharist, but never felt called to the priesthood. So that was maybe his way of showing humility, that he would assist those who did bring the Eucharist to him. So I would say it's believable, yes, that Francis was a deacon. So the Polish connection, I know that there was a large presence of Franciscans in Poland. One of the saints from the conventual tradition is Saint Maximilian Kolbe. So in his time, there was a large group of friars serving in Poland, and it grew under his guidance as well in different parts of Poland. So I would say that might be why you see a lot of them in the States, like in Connecticut, especially. The friars would come to serve the immigrant communities of those languages. So we had friars from Germany and Poland that came to the States initially. So that's where you see a strong presence of Franciscans. Even to this day, there's still a strong presence of friars in Poland.
Okay.
Yeah.
A couple of questions about relating the Franciscans to other religious orders. So one person asked about the Franciscans and the Jesuits both seem to serve the poor. How would you distinguish that way of life? And someone else asked about the difference between the Franciscans and the Dominicans, at least in terms of kind of regular day-to-day schedule, and similarities or differences there. So however you want to run with that question.
Yeah. Well, I think there is certainly a commitment to justice and to serve the needs of the poor. We see that in Francis himself. Like, there was an earlier question too of someone asking about St. Francis and the leper. And his embrace of the leper was something of a chance for the friars to see in the other, to see Christ. And so when we serve the needs of those who are poor, we are embracing the poor Christ, who was naked and had his open hands on the cross. So Francis's approach to his service to the poor was certainly one that embraced that. He was afraid of lepers at first, and that's something beautiful to look at too, that he had a fear of lepers at first and didn't want to approach them. And then there was this movement in his heart. There's this, what he wrote in his own writings, that which was bitter became sweet. And so he was able to look with new eyes at the leper, and was able to embrace the leper. So certainly the uniqueness of Francis and his approach to it would be the way to distinguish a Franciscan service to the poor, that embrace of those who are excluded. Um, and then with the Franciscan Dominican stuff, I feel like there's a lot of similarity. I mean, at least when it comes to our ministry, we want to serve the needs of the church, and do what's asked of us by bishops and different communities. So we serve in parishes, we serve in schools, we serve in campus ministries. So there's a lot of similarity to our schedules, probably, that there's a blend of both prayer and action. And so we come together with our community in the mornings and the evenings, especially to kind of have that time to pray. And then we go out and do our ministries. So there's probably a similar thing, but it probably looks just slightly different when it comes to like how the schedule goes and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is maybe more of a specific geographical question, so see if you know, but it's the one here about Melchizedek. And the
Okay.
only place I've seen a representation of him was at Assisi, at the church down the hill associated with the Poor Clares.
Okay.
Wondered about that beautiful statue and why it has such a prominent place. Anything you can share about that?
Actually, I don't know that image in Assisi, but it's funny that you say it, because I have on my screensaver, like on my desktop, an image of Melchizedek. If you want, I can share it right now so you can see it. But I remember I took a picture of the altar at the church where I was ordained a priest. So I was ordained in St. Louis Church in Buffalo, New York, and they had an image of Melchizedek, like offering the bread and wine, and then they have an image of Abraham sacrificing Isaac, and they're both there side by side in front of the tabernacle. And so it's obviously a Eucharistic image, that sacrificial offering, Melchizedek offering bread and wine, the origins of the priesthood. I'm not sure why there would be that image in a Poor Clare church, but I'm imagining either they became, the custodians of that church. Maybe it was always there, and then they came into it, and that became part of their, visual for prayer while they were living there.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a question, a double parted question that I think in maybe some popular contemporary, roughly contemporary Catholic culture as a whole, there's two things maybe that people associate with St. Francis. One is that famous song, right?
Right.
Na, 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 na.
Right.
And then the other one is like St. Francis and the bird baths.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So I noticed in your points of Franciscan spirituality, you didn't talk about peace. You didn't talk about animals or nature or birds. So is this a legit manifestation of Franciscan spirituality? Is it someone kind of taking something and running in a weird direction with it? Give us the lowdown, the real story about.
Yes, this is like the Oprah interview, right? This is the exclusive.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's
I'll
bust
no holds
this
barred. Yeah.
for the whole world.
Right. No, I would say, that is something that should be included in our understanding of St. Francis for sure. He loved creation, and his Canticle of the Creatures, which is not the "Make me a channel of your peace," but that canticle, like, "Praised be you, Lord, through brother sun and sister moon, sister water, brother fire." He had a relationship with creation that was beautiful because he knew the origin of it. He wasn't just praising the fire, he wasn't praising the sun, he was praising the Lord for the gift of the sun, the gift of the moon and water. And so certainly creation is part of a Franciscan spirituality, and I'm sorry that I didn't include that. But I would say sometimes it gets taken to the extreme, like you've mentioned, like that. Sometimes there's people that take it to a level where it's like it's not it's forgetting the creator, I guess would be the way to look at it. One thing that we do here at St. Anne's is we have, the blessing of pets, like we do that around the feast of St. Francis, because Francis loved creation. He loved animals. So there is a sense of like showing that love by thanking God for the gift of our pets. And so that's something that we certainly embrace. Um, the peace prayer, it's a really interesting story because we have lots of writings of St. Francis. That's something that I feel like we're blessed to have. I know that there's not as many writings of St. Dominic for the Dominicans, but we've been blessed. Like Francis wrote a lot. And so we can look at some of his thoughts or how he evolved over the years as he began the movement of the community, and as he was nearing his death, his last testament. So in that time, he never wrote, make me a channel of your peace. That was never words that he himself composed. But what's often said is that it's attributed to him. So these were words that were found on a prayer card, I think sometime in the 40s. I think it was like the 1940s, there was a prayer card that had those words. And I think either whoever wrote it said that they attributed it to St. Francis. And so the words, even though he didn't compose them, they certainly reflect his life, that he was someone who wanted to bring joy into the world where there was hatred. Let me bring love. Where there is sadness, joy. Where there is doubt, faith. Like it captures poetically what his life was like. So it's kind of stayed as this peace prayer of St. Francis. But what's funny is that he's composed so many other prayers that don't get memorized or remembered, that are beautiful. And so that the Franciscan in me that's like, oh, there's so many other things that he says and does that are beautiful, that get neglected. But anyways, yeah, that's in a nutshell those two aspects. Creation, certainly, yes, important. And the peace prayer, not Francis's, but certainly reflects him.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Someone asked a question, maybe talking about creation. Oh, tell us the story about the rose without thorns.
Yes. Okay. So in the Portiuncula, so that's the church within a church in Assisi, there's a section of roses that bloom without thorns, and the understanding was that Francis, he struggled with different sins, and I think sins of the flesh, and so he was wanting to kind of do a harder penance, and he wanted to kind of roll in the thorns. And what happened was that the thorns didn't exist, like they fell, and so he didn't torture himself from his sins, and so these thornless roses still grow in Assisi, in that area there near the Portiuncula. So that's the story of the roses without thorns. Yes.
Wow.
Francis was kind of harsh on himself at times, and so I think God was kind of going, okay, it's all right, like I've got you. So
Gotcha.
yeah.
How about this as a question? You've obviously talked about St. Francis a lot. There was some mention of St. Anthony, but maybe for someone who's not as familiar with the whole gamut of Franciscan saints, is there one or two Franciscan saints that you like or feel an attachment to or think have an interesting story that maybe wouldn't be kind of run-of-the-mill knowledge for us,
Yeah.
Dominican formed people here at St. Mary's?
Right. Um, well, Saint Clare, certainly. I talked a little bit about her, but she was known as like the little plant of Saint Francis. She was close to him, and in many times Francis would go to her for guidance. And so I liked that there was some level of collegiality, I guess, between them, that they knew to kind of talk with each other and see how to go about with their communities, and how to live it out well. So St. Clare certainly is a great, you know, top 10 saint, when it comes to that. One of my favorites is St. Joseph of Cupertino. He's a conventual friar. His story is one you've probably even seen. You might have seen a movie that went out, I forget when it came out, but it was called The Reluctant Saint. And it talks about St. Joseph of Cupertino. So he's the patron of students taking final exams. He's the patron of aviators, And I'll explain, not the glasses, but actual like plain flyers. So the story, and this is, what's written about St. Joseph of Cupertino. He was around the 1600s, I think. Um, really struggled with studies. Uh, but when it came time to have his exam in preparation for the priesthood, he was asked the question that he knew the answer to. Like he struggled with a lot, but then he was asked the question that he knew how to answer. So that's how he became the patron of test takers. And then the aviators, the flying, he levitated. Saint Joseph of Cupertino was the flying friar. He when he was in prayer, he was known to levitate in prayer, and the friars would, kind of get annoyed by it, but there it was. He was levitating. So there's this kind of mystic element to Saint Joseph of Cupertino, but he was someone who, to me, shows that God's grace works through anything that we struggle with too. Like that God's grace shines through, and so I really like him in particular. There's too many though. There's so many other saints, but those two stand out to me as like good ones that maybe get pushed to the side or we don't remember.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's all of our questions for this evening, and we're past 8 o'clock. So
Okay.
thank you very much for your time, Father Manny.
You're welcome, and thank you all for your attention. And hopefully, what I've shared is something to kind of appreciate when it comes to the different traditions of our church.
Amen. So
Yeah.
again, thank you very much. And for those who've been joining us regularly, next week will be a young Jesuit priest I know, Father Phil Hurley, who will be speaking about Ignatian spirituality. So until next week, everyone, God bless. And yeah, God bless.
Yes. Take care,
Bye.
everyone.
Take
Peace.
care.